Jake watches movies recommended by Jake's Movie Picker 2K. So let's pick a movie off of here that I have not seen before and do not believe is on another list. Kroll? Go look at number 28. No way! What? Welcome to episode 3. Jake watches movies recommended by Jake's Movie Picker 2K. I give fire to water. It shall not return except to the man who reviews films. I take fire from water. I give it to no one except for the films fate chooses me to review. Okay, as we established last time, I don't know anything. I didn't know anything about the movie Kroll. Obviously now I know a lot more about it. This was a really interesting movie to review. I think I'm going to do my review a little bit differently this time. I think that Kroll is a movie of opposites in many ways. It's a really big budget, like sci-fi fantasy movie that also, is about a marriage. So those are, there's a lot of care and time clearly taken to give all of these characters backstories, but there's also so many characters that it's easy to lose track of them, and many of them aren't given their own introduction, and some of them I think just disappear. Like, it was hard for me to track all of the characters throughout the movie. It has some really good practical sets and effects and everything, versus literally some of the worst special effects I've ever seen. I think that I'm gonna have to use clips in this episode, which I haven't done before, just to really try to emphasize what I'm talking about, because it's just crazy. So to talk about this movie, I think I could just talk about the things that I like, which there were a lot of things that I liked. There were some good jokes in it. There were some interesting characters. There was some really good sets and all of that stuff. And then to talk about the things I didn't like would, it'd take a very long time to really unpack all of my thoughts on this movie. And I'm going to try my best to unpack them in a reasonable amount of time. So it starts with this little voiceover about how two people will get married and they'll unite this planet that's been in turmoil. It sort of sounds like something we've heard before. But yeah, it's about a marriage that's about to happen, and just before the actual moment where they, pass the fire, the castle gets swarmed. The couple, the girl, Lisa, gets kidnapped, and the potential husband, whose name will be here, he has to go save her. And, part of it is I don't want to watch this guy go save this woman, but it is a 37, almost 40-year-old movie. So I try not to judge it too harshly by modern standards, even though the idea that a woman should have agency shouldn't be that modern of a thought. It is. So yeah, he goes to save her. He has to go through a series of trials. He has to go get this glaive that is rumored to maybe exist. And this is where the movie, okay, at the beginning of the movie, I was thinking this movie to me feels like it could just be, this movie to me feels like it could just be this movie could have been Star Wars. And I say that both that it could have been huge, I feel like, and that I didn't like it that much because I'm not actually a big Star Wars fan. I don't know why I said actually, as if people might think that I am. I think that some of the movies are okay. So I was really looking for what is it that made this movie a cult classic rather than, a classic, or what happened. And this is where it really started to set in that, so he has to go get this glaive and these rocks are falling, and it looks pretty cheesy, but it's also the first in this series of okay, he has to get this glaive and then go to this next place, and then this bandit or this magician comes and joins them, and so they're getting their crew together, and in that way it feels a lot like Lord of the Rings, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because those movies and books are very popular. Then as it continues, it's just okay, he needs to go to this place to get, he needs to go to this place to find out where the castle is going to be. And then there's a bunch of bandits and they join up. And then they need to go to actually a different place. And then a Cyclops joins up. And it's just one of these things where it's like, okay, we just need to go to this place and then go to this place and then go to this place. And it's not, I always have a hard time like talking about these movies because I actually feel the same way about the movie Inside Out. I have two major problems with the movie Inside Out, which this is not a review of, but a lot of it is that like it's just like, okay, well we'll go to this place and solve this problem, and then there's another problem, we have to go to this other place, which it's not in any way related to the characters. Like it's not like there's something inherent to the main character of this movie that he has to go to these specific places. That's just like how the story has been set up, and it didn't need to be set up in that way where it just feels like let's do one thing and then the other, like a scavenger hunt, because no one wants to watch a scavenger hunt. Yeah, so they basically go through, and then when he gets the glaive, the guy who tells him to get it, he's like, when will I know when, how will I know when to use this? And the guy's like, you'll know when it's time. And so finally at the end he uses it, and then I think in the next, like the last 10 minutes or something, he uses it like 4 more times. It's like, so this isn't a one use thing, like he could use it several times. Yeah, and then at the very end, it's like they realize that this whole time there's like this woman who pulls fire out of water, which is really cool. And then that woman just gets trapped in a castle and she really doesn't do anything. And then at the very end, it seems like they're trying to figure out how to get her, or how to get them out of there. And so they're like, well, we'll have her give the fire to him, which is like hinted at the beginning that they should have done it, but I don't know why he chose not to take the fire. I don't know. It really felt like a movie where they had some general ideas, and again, like really in-depth ideas about who these characters are and what this world is. And then the plot, they sort of had to just, shift things around and try to make it work in ways that I don't think were always successful. It really just felt like it was trying to, make up for a lack of the depth at the end. And that's not something that I really enjoyed in the movie. So what I didn't like about this movie isn't that like the effects aren't good, because some of them are and some of them really aren't. Like that really is, I think, some of the stuff that puts this movie into like its cult classic status. And I think it's stuff that could have, really worked for it in a campy way that I think people would have enjoyed. It's just that it doesn't feel like they're okay. So I was talking about the Star Wars thing earlier. I think the difference between that movie and this movie, which they both feel like they're by, somewhat amateur filmmakers who are trying to do something grand to, varying levels of success. But the difference between those two movies is that Crawl, I just don't think has much heart in it. And so here is where I'll insert like the cool thing that I learned. I don't know if cool thing is the right term, but the head of the head of the production company who made this movie, who I can't actually remember off the top of my head, the production company or who the guy's name was, basically came to a screenwriter and he was like, hey, do you want to make a sci-fi movie? And the guy was like, yeah, okay, like let me work with my partner and we'll try to come up with something. So they come up with Crawl, and the first drafts, they were like, okay, well, we're going to pass this off to another guy who's just going to take a pass at it. And then that guy turned in his script and they were like, okay, we're going to go back to the first draft. So they worked from the first draft. And I think like that's really like, you can feel a lot of that in this movie, that it didn't. And look, I'm not like totally stupid about how Hollywood works. Like, of course, it's not always just people like have this burning idea. Like a lot of it comes from studio heads and all of that. But, the fact that he was just like, hey, let's make a sci-fi movie, and it's coming out around the time of like Star Wars. It really just feels like they were trying to capitalize on something rather than like telling a story that they were really burning to tell. Also, like this movie had a $30 million budget, which is like 120 million in modern currency. We'll put it right here. Also, the poster for Kroll was up earlier. I didn't mention it. Yeah, so like the budget just kept growing and growing, and they had to make like all these different sets because the story just kept changing, and like the engine kept changing, and who the bad guy was changing. And so there is like a lot of really cool practical stuff in this movie, but it just seems like they should have, instead of figuring it out as they went, if they just stopped and been like, okay, let's really nail this down and like figure out what this world is and what the story is, I think this could have been a really good movie. I don't know if like the effects could have been helped, but I also read that there was a point where the head of the effects department just took a 3-week vacation because he was just like so over this movie. So it was like, okay, well, I guess effects are shut down for a while. So I think like that really comes through in this movie. And for that reason, the fact that it's just like such opposites, like it's such a, there are parts that are such a good movie and could have been a franchise, and really like all this mythos could have been built around it. We could still be getting, Krull books to this day. Like that movie does exist in there, and I'm surprised that they haven't remade Krull, but that's another thing. But then there's also this movie that like has all these characters who you don't know who they are, and it has all these bad effects, and it just doesn't care about its characters. And so when these two things clashing, I think I just have to give this movie a 5 out of 10 because what else would make sense for a movie that's so split between what it is. I'm glad that I did like have this movie be picked, regardless of how insane the odds were. I mean, really, it had the same odds as any other movie if you really think about it, but it was crazy. It blew my mind. But I'm glad that I had this movie picked because it's not a movie that I think I would have watched otherwise, and it was a challenging watch. The opening credits are like 4 minutes long. There's this shot that's very reminiscent of Star Wars. I'll probably put that right here. So it was really challenging to watch, and I think like grappling with challenging movies that I wouldn't normally watch is a lot of what this project is about. Like, yeah, it's great to watch a few different movies that I probably wouldn't have picked up or wouldn't have picked soon and enjoy them, but that's not necessarily what I'm doing this for. So I am glad to have watched this. I figured I didn't have to put this at the beginning just because, I don't know, I feel like we want to get into the review, and then I'm going to pick this one. Gleaming the Cube, a 1989 movie. Alright, let's copy it. Go to Cult. Krull was like 29? 28. That's right, because I thought it was 82. I said 1989. So we'll just turn this 3 into a 9. Let's just search Gleaming just to be safe. Gleaming? No. Okay. What is still on here is Rock and Roll High School because I didn't bother to take it off because I'm just going to have to replace it again. All right, we have, as always, the 20-sided die. And as always, I'm gonna randomize it after. 14. All right, let's do it live. Randomize range. 14. Action. All right, so we're gonna get something a little bit different this time. I have here the big boy, as I so fondly refer to it. I have not successfully kept it on, and it's rolling further and further away. All right, let's see. What's at the top there? That looks like it's 16 to me. Is that a bit of a weird angle, so it might be hard to tell, but it is 16. Okay. So, action films. It says action and adventure on here. I don't know why I necessarily did that. 16. Paradox, a 2017 film. Another movie I don't know anything about, so I'm looking forward to watching that and reviewing that. Yeah, hopefully this was an enjoyable episode of the show. I thought it was cool to watch a movie to talk about like what could have been for Krull. It could have been the next Star Wars or the next Lord of the Rings or something, and instead it's relegated to cult classic status. Understandably so. I don't think it's a movie that you have to watch, but I think it's definitely interesting to see. If you're like me and you sort of don't totally love Star Wars and you don't totally get it, I think it is interesting to watch this movie to see, what the differences are, other than obviously like the Force and all. Like obviously there's some differences there. Actually, there is a part where he just pulls the glaive back to him, so that's. But it just, seeing like the amount of heart that was put into Star Wars and how much George Lucas like cared about that story and worked on it for a very long time, regardless of. Can't get into all that right now. Versus this movie, which, I mean, they did work on it for a long time, but after they started production and everything, just seeing the clash between these movies, I think it's very interesting. To see why this movie didn't succeed is probably a good case study if you want to make movies like this. I don't know. I'm going to go. I'm going to watch this next movie. I'm going to review it, and I will see you next time on Jake Watches Movies picked by Jake's Movie Picker 2K.